Hi everyone. So the prep time is over. So we may begin our debate now. So just a few general ground rules before we begin the debate. Make sure to respect each other. Make sure to refer each other to their gender pronouns. My name is Haikadenia and I'll be chairing you guys for this debate sparring. And yeah, let's have fun. With that said, I would like to call upon Prime Minister to open up the speech.
Prime Minister, open up speech.
But ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this occasion. You are highly welcome, but from on the side opposition of this debate, I wish every one of us a wonderful and a good speech in today's arguments. Thank you.
It's not the debate, right?
Okay. You guys may introduce yourself from your own seat. No, you may introduce yourself from your own seat. And then we can begin.
My name is Khadija Muhammad Kabir, and I am the Prime Minister of today's opposition.
Okay.
We are welcome all.
What about the Prime Minister?
Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this debate. I am Anjina Ibrahim Gofi from Team Malaysia-Nigeria, and I'm the Deputy Prime Minister for the side opposition in today's argument.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Abubakar Adamu, and I'm supposed to be the lead of the opposition for today's argument. Thank you all.
Hi, do we have two options here? Do we have two options here? You guys
Yeah, we have two
right?
teams here.
You guys prep op also, right? Yeah, I think y'all should be in that room.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Chair this time. Chair and record. No, just. Aesthetics. How much you want me to use? I'm going. Oh, no, sorry. It was a joke. Okay. You guys ready? Costumes ready? Are you guys ready?
Yeah.
Opposition's ready?
What?
Opposition's ready for the debate?
I thought prop always starts.
Yeah. No,
are you ready?
I guess I'm ready.
we're ready.
So I would like to call upon Prime Minister to begin the debate.
It's 8 minutes.
Yeah, it's 8 minutes.
Outside. 3, 2, 1. Private education has been responsible for decades of inequality and disparity, and it's time we end this. What do we support on the side of the government? We have 3 things in the setup. First, I think in terms of private schools, what are they going to look like? It's just any education institutions that the management and ownership are under private actors, so this can be a range of things instead of the government. So it can look like larger networks such as the Sunway Group or singular universities that are running by themselves. Number two, in the process of abolishing, we're happy to financially compensate, give money towards the previous owners of these things, and then we'll put it under the state control. And thirdly, we're happy to support a range of public schools as well. So for example, in certain countries within Europe, like the Netherlands, we have free tertiary education, which is subsidized at low cost. Also countries like Malaysia and Singapore, we can still pay a small fee, which is still funded by tax revenue, or you pay at cost for these institutions. What is the burden in this debate then? First, I think the opposition cannot win a debate by saying that some private schools are good. You have to prove why the majority of them are good, and therefore we require them to still exist. We will explain why private schools are usually overwhelmingly harmful and why they meet the burden of something that should be abolished. Number two, they cannot say that we will have both public and private schools at the same time. The reason as to why this is not feasible, as we'll explain in our arguments, private schools usually mean less resources and less talent being in public schools, which means they need to take the trade-off of less public schools, or at least worse public schools on the opposition. I think we're happy to not have this at all. There are two arguments I want to talk about in this speech. First, on access and why private education locks out many people from being able to access good schooling. And number two, on why we make public schools significantly better, increasing quality for all. The first argument then is on access. We think private education imposes a financial barrier to entry, which locks out vulnerable people from getting quality education. There are three reasons for this. The first is that private schools tend to have very high tuition fees, costing thousands per month, which is usually a high proportion of lower income people's income. But number two, many private schools benefit from strong reputations in things like QS World Rankings, also within local rankings of these institutions. If I am consistently ranked the #1 school in Malaysia or the #2 school in whatever country, I can set very high fees because there is always high demand for my education specifically. So private schools don't have to lower this tuition because there will always be rich people who can and will pay for it. Sure.
Please, with a die elucidation, critically explain to the whole House and how these debates can be explained in terms of academic standards of the school, both private and public schools.
Yeah, sure. So we don't think that public schools are inherently worse off than private schools. I think we'll explain the argument later on as to why public schools are going to be better under our side, even if you believe their case that right now they are bad. That's not the burden because we're going to prove why it gets better. Therefore, the third reason as to why the people can't get access is the difficulty of regulation itself. So it's hard for governments to set things like price caps because it directly goes against the profit incentives of these private institutions. Now, the opposition may claim that we have things like need-based scholarships or quotas to help poorer people. The first thing is they have to prove why they get these scholarships most of the time. Usually it's just for things like image, which means most of them are very tokenistic. But number two, usually these scholarships are only given to a few people who are already well off and are able to get good grades in terms of merit, so they are not the people who are in need of the most help. Have a seat. The impact of this is quite simple. Number one, I think poorer individuals just get locked out of education, which increases the inequality gap. Many of them turn to working for like the family business instead, or going for vocational training, which may be adequate for survival, but it does not allow them to do things like upskill, to get better and higher paying jobs. So they get stuck in a cycle of poverty. Later on. Number two, even if they do manage to take on these things like loans, they often go into a cycle of debt, which is quite hard for them to pay off because of the extreme cost. They spend the first few years working out to pay off these debts and high interest. The comparative is this. Number one, I think public education is usually far cheaper and more accessible because governments need to cater to poorer regions in order to get support. A private company doesn't need to be voted in or voted out and therefore can charge high prices because they don't need legitimacy and buy-in from poorer groups. Number two, public education can be cheaper because they are funded by things like tax revenue when states collect income or corporate tax. Additionally, the state can cross-subsidize from other arms of the state as well, like healthcare, which means you're better able to make these things and therefore governments can run these educations at a loss. Before that, I'll be happy to take a point.
Please, don't you think that a report at the Mayor today, 2 years ago, discussed how schools in Georgia in the midst of major fund drawing cut for schools have no choice but to lift all chase size limits to accommodate students with faculties? Please address the House.
So first, I think in terms of the quality of public education right now, the reason as to why it's likely to get better is because the burden is then placed on public institutions to create better systems for education. So the reason as to why most of the case of the best schools right now under private education are able to have this quality is going to then be replaced by these public institutions then. So the governments are able to run this, and now the majority of people are going to be going to public schools instead, which is why you have incentives to pour in more resources in these areas. The second argument is about quality, why we make public schools better, directly addressing their biggest contention here. Why do we think public schools have far better quality on our side? Number one, things like democratic incentives. Education is a very important issue to citizens because it contributes to the economy. Because people know that their kids will eventually go into schools and get educated. Poor people have far more political power to influence governments than economic power to influence these corporations. But number two, it becomes more difficult for governments to dodge accountability by scapegoating or diverting attention away from the education system because people know they are responsible for it. When they're responsible for providing education, there'll be far more pressure on governments to improve things such as access, fixing facilities like classrooms and toilets, or setting national curriculums that are good for everyone. This is exclusive to when you get more people opting towards public education. The second layer is on things like brain drain and human capital. I think many richer individuals flock towards private schools instead of public schools. I think with these people with more political power or more economic power are also forced to go towards public schools. That's why you have more incentives to push for more funding in these areas, like people being able to speak up, like lobby for certain policies to happen, like more funding going into these areas. While this may not be completely exclusive, I think there's a huge difference when richer people are also forced to experience these public schools for themselves. So if currently right now public schools are like have low quality facilities, low quality teachers, at the point where it's no longer private schools, these people will be better able to go into public schools to make them better, and the people who are attending public schools also want to push for governments to make these spaces better. So get more quality teachers who would otherwise go to private schools going towards public schools, but they're still able to be compensated because the state is able to pay them more. Finally, we get things like better national development. So the scale has lots of data around the country. You don't have to defend very bad state curriculums that are obviously very authoritarian or autocratic. Because if this were the case, there's a very extreme levels of countries who will probably not be on either side of the debate. So I think probably the state is going to be somewhat good here. Otherwise, they can't also regulate the private schools under their side. So I think when they're primarily in charge of these curriculums, so the state is able to influence good things such as having more STEM education if that's needed for the economy, or influencing the types of education that I think most people should be getting. So the end of this speech is very simple. We prove why far more people get access to education, which is important because key groups of people are very vulnerable and need education to succeed in life. And number two, we prove why the quality education at the top is now going to be accessible towards everyone, and we improve quality education for people who would otherwise not have access to it. Which means, even if rich people under their side may lose access towards these private schools, it gets far better for them when they currently go into public schools. We make life better for everyone and win on the two major parts of this debate we are quite proud to propose.
I thank the Prime Minister for that remarkable speech. Now I'd like to call upon Leader of Opposition to open up the case for opposition side. Here.
Very much.
Private schools do contain other advantages, of course, whether it to be networks or a sense of confidence that can shape into a poisonous sense of social security. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this debate. Standing in front of you here is Muhammad Kabir Khadija from Team Kabir Nigeria, and I'm standing here raising without any fear or doubt to oppose this motion which says that this House will abolish private schools. I've been the Prime Minister from today's opposition. I would like to start by highlighting some specific areas we are going to talk about. I am going to tell the House on what is abolish private and schools, which are the key areas that makes up the argument. Tell the House on some of the reasons on why private schools should not be abolished. First, the Deputy Prime Minister, who will also elaborate, rebut, counter-attack, and hold tell the whole house on the reasons on why private schools should not be abolished. My week will deconstruct the entire debate and tell why it rightfully belongs to our side. At last, summarize what we present in our arguments. But before I come down to my main argument, members of this house, let me first have a look at what the side proposition has just said here. The side proposition lack a cogent debate. The side proposition lack a logical argument on which we are here to know about the reasons and on why private schools should be abolished. But we have not had that from the side proposition. Therefore, we can clearly understand that the side proposition does not stand a chance to win today's argument. And also addressing the Prime Minister from the side proposition, who made mention that abolishing private schools people will go into the public school to make it better. It's not people that will make public school better. That is what I want you to understand. That the government is responsible for constructing the public school. Therefore, you can clearly understand that the private schools are better than the public schools. And also addressing the Prime Minister from the side proposition, who might mention that the private schools are having more of peace. And what I want you to understand here is that having more of peace is not a reason on why private schools should be abolished today. This is because private school is for who can sponsor. Therefore, if you can sponsor private school, it's meant for you to put your child there. And if you cannot, there is public school. Therefore, we can clearly understand that here the benefit outweigh the harm. So we can clearly understand that there is no reason on why private schools should be abolished. Now, back to my points, member of this house. I will start by defining the keywords in today's debate. Abolish, which means formally to put an end to a system, practice, or institution, while private actually means lending it to or for the use of a particular person or group of people only. While a school is an institution, designed to provide learning space and learning environment for the teaching of students under the direction of teachers. Now, back to my argument, members of this house. A school to teach. Private school is meant to teach. Let's look at why parents choose private schools mainly. The private school teach their children the necessary skills for an ever-changing life. Many parents are choosing private schools. This is because private school is an institution which is the best way of ever-changing the life of young children. This is because the public schools are not more developed on how you will choose for your children the best. One of the accepted benefits of private school is that they provide exceptional and challenging educational experience through extracurriculum activities in which many public schools lack this. Therefore, when we weigh the benefit of private school, you can clearly understand that the benefit outweighs the harm. And also, this is a reason that clearly shows that this motion must stand. Let's look at how private schools improve the quality of education. The ultimate goal of any parent is to provide their children with quality education, in which the private schools have all those qualities, which includes one, curriculum. The school curriculum is in private schools is said to take care of curriculum activities, to take care of overall development of the students. It promotes quality education by incorporating of a variety of extracurricular activities. They design the curriculum to promote productive process in the manner that brings to the expected learning outcomes for every class and subject. So an extensive curriculum plays a critical role in enhancing the quality of education. Therefore, we can clearly understand that the private schools enhance the quality of education, which is lacked in the public schools. Therefore, we can clearly understand and see a reason on why private schools should not be abolished in this house. There are major challenges in public schools, in which if private schools are abolished, the public school will be the source of education today, which include they lack teaching skills and lack good teachers that will teach and help children. Therefore, we can clearly understand that private school should not be abolished in today's argument. With this, we are happy on how we diligently clarify the whole House with strong reason and cogent fact from when we propose this motion. Thank you.
Thank you for that fine speech. Now let's call upon Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case on government side. Here.
For the sake of the benefits of private education, opposition is okay with leaving the poor behind. The burden the opposition had to prove in this debate was to defend that the majority and most private schools in status quo would be good. They have failed to prove this. They also needed to engage with most of Uma's speech regarding access, quality, as well as the ability for us to have better national development on a bigger scale, right? Remember House, that by virtue of making public schools national, it becomes a national agenda, therefore everyone will care, right? In his speech, two things. Firstly is a few pieces of responses, and secondly, my line of my argumentation on how this disrupts the public trust within the education system, right? So firstly, my first response is this whole line of argumentation on how the government is responsible for constructing public schools. Therefore, we should support private schools, right? The thing is, I don't really understand how this argument engages with the spirit of the motion in the first place, but understand that it is a much greater role that the state has, which is to cater towards the education for all people on the ground and not just exclusively to individuals who can access these private schools in the first place. My second response on how they said that no thank you, on this whole line of argumentation on arguing that there are vast benefits to private schools, there are extra curriculums and all these things that can benefit for people on the ground. Understand that the prerequisite to all these benefits is the ability to access these things in the first place, therefore, and understand that the abilities for individuals on the ground to access private schools in the first place is capital, is money, as well as the ability for them to actually to go to these schools in the first place. Therefore, in order for all of these benefits to actually materialize, they also have to prove why do they benefit not just only the people who can access these schools, but also how about the individuals who they live out at the end of the day. I don't understand, because Uma has already proved to you why when we nationalize schools, when the state takes over the existing public schools within status quo, he already told you as how there will be better access, right? He already told you as to how we are able to actually co-opt the benefits and prove to us why the quality of public schools within status quo can also improve. That line of argumentation has not been engaged with by side opposition. But before my last response, yes, QI.
Please, don't you think that tuition assistance and grants for people who are involved in private schools is given to all people? Please address.
The point in which when you abolish all private schools is the point in which we can provide more teaching assistance for public schools, and in the first place we can co-opt that benefit, right? But lastly, this line of argumentation on how individuals and people on the ground want what's best for the children, right? I think that we can also still uphold this principle in the first place. But understand, the reason is why we have much greater magnitude for this benefit is because we're actually able to give this access to all parents on the ground, whereby even poor parents can also care about their child access to a better education. We win this as well. So my line of argumentation, which is to say why does and how under the House the public trust in the education system is greater reduced. But understand first, why is trust important, right? Number one, it's because people are more likely to send children to schools in the first place when they trust the education system more. But secondly, which is much more important, is that the people on the ground are more likely to support and give funding to these schools in the first place once they trust these schools and the system that it implements. Thirdly, on the outside the house, when people trust the education system more, we're actually able to help the most vulnerable people within societies, which is poor people, because now they're more likely to trust the school system. Meaning by that, they're more likely to believe that if I send my child to school, they can escape the cycle of poverty. And this is a legitimate pathway in which they should pursue. But lastly, on the impact that it has on the mindsets of students who are inside the education system, right? When the point in which when the existence of private schools continue is the point in which you constantly give students a benchmark to compare themselves to. Meaning by that, when they go to school, they'll always be thinking, "Oh, my school will never have the same facilities because the private school next door has much better facilities." Therefore, their confidence within the education system itself diminishes. Right? But why does the trust of public schools decreases much more further under the outside of the house? Firstly, it's just by the mere existence of it in the first place, right? It acts as a constant comparison and a benchmark for these students, right? Therefore, and also recognize it is human nature in the first place for us to be comparative towards the things, the comparative to the lack of things that we don't have. So I think that it is principally abhorrent for these schools to exist, for you to present these things towards children who cannot access it, to show them a utopia that they can never access in the first place. I think that this is something that is incredibly cruel. That's why the trust decreases under this side of the house. But secondly, on the aspect of governance of these schools in the first place, right? Understand that they have to take the trade-off and concede that public schools have more funding, have more capital, and therefore the opportunities that the students have in these schools open up, right? Therefore, under that side of the house, they have to recognize that the funding for public schools is limited, and the ability for them to continue to ascend within society is much limited as well. They are shackled to an existence of mediocrity, right? But also understand that when a school is able to receive more funding and therefore they have more opportunities to access, that's the point in which that they can gain much more they're able to gain more social capital for themselves, right? That means that when they want to market the school, they can pick things like, my school was a debate champion school. They're able to gain funding and sponsors from this because they have the ability to instigate to instigate the confidence of sponsors and investors in the first place. That is why. So the point in which that they cannot access these things in the first place is the point in which that in the people and parents on the ground, they lose faith towards the education system because their children's schools are unable to access these same opportunities. What are the impacts to cycles, right? Understand. The first thing is that it is less likely for people to want to remain in the system in the first place. When individuals so understand that the trust of the education system is chronological, right? That means the more likely that parents trust to send their children to public schools, more likely than not they're going to trust to send their children to public universities as well. The problem that we see in status quo, the reason as to why we see people migrating and moving towards other countries in the first place, because of this lack of trust in the first place. That is why it causes states and countries to lose possible successes to the nation without this debate. Thank you.
Thank you for that fun speech. Now let's call upon deputy leaders of opposition to continue the case.
Education breeds confidence, confidence breeds hope, and hope breeds peace. Honorable adjudicators, all protocols duly observed. Good day to you all. I am Ibrahim Amina Kurfi, as mentioned earlier, and I'm here to oppose the motion which says government should abolish private schools. But before I proceed into my own argument, there are some things mentioned by the side proposition that needs to be considered. Considering the speech that the proposition may claim that schools charge more fees with high-priced education, but life is a game of choice and people choose based on what they are able to do. So therefore, people who are able to be in private schools can be in private schools, and people who are able to be in public schools can be in public schools, because life is a game of choice and you choose what you want to do based on what you have. So therefore, this point must not stand. Also, the proposition made mention of tax collection, but private schools do not pay tax. Therefore, the side proposition lacked lackadaisical facts about what they are talking. So therefore, also this point was not raised. Also, the lead speaker from the proposition did not define the keywords or share the argument among the members, which is the key role of any prime minister in an argument. Therefore, we can understand that the prime minister did not play his role in today's argument. Also should be noted. Back to my own argument, ladies and gentlemen. Safe learning environments. Families love the fact that private schools offer a safe learning environment with a culture that places emphasis on personal responsibility and ethics. The lower staff to student ratio allows for more observation and intervention in case of a conflict, mental disturbance, and help reducing depression. As we can all understand that there are guidance counselors in most of these private schools who help students who are depressed or either hurt or something. So therefore, we can understand that private schools have more impact on these children as life, socialization, and many more. Therefore, this motion must stand in today's argument, as we can understand that private schools bring a safer learning environment for families and for students so that they will not be mentally disturbed and run into trauma as a result. Introducing depression, as I said, on ethics creates a notable difference in a school environment, where according to a study conducted by the Fresa Institute, 72% of private school parents strongly agreed with the statement that their school was safe, a factor that they said improved both the quality of their child's educational experience as well as the ability to achieve. Private school must not be abolished, because we can see how safe the education is as of public schools. Public schools are not really as safe as private schools. So therefore, these children must be safe, as safe health is wealth. Without health, there cannot be anything to talk about, because if you're probably sick in bed and there is no thing to do. So health is the priority. And if they keep the students safe, everyone is happy and there will not be sickness or anything like that. It creates a safer environment for students to learn. Therefore, this motion must stand. Also, there is individualized attention from teachers. Private schools are typically smaller than public schools, leading to smaller average class sizes. This dynamic benefits students in many different ways. You will often feel more comfortable sharing your opinions or venturing a guest answer in a smaller, more intimate settings. Researchers find that overcrowding can reduce students' ability to pay attention to teachers' instruction and increase in students' behavior issues. This is because if a class is probably like 100 people or more, you can see that there will not be attention. This person will be talking to the other one will be talking to the other, and there you have it. You're not learning, you're just making noise or probably not listening to teachers, distracted by random things. But in private schools, you can see a conducive learning environment with a few number of people due to the availability of classes and also teachers. So people will learn, people will value things, and people will understand. Everyone will have attention paid to them individually till you understand. You have your point of information.
When only rich and wealthy families can afford private schools and extracurricular activities, what happens to millions of poor people who will never be able to get them?
There is the government, and it is a public property. As you made mention earlier, the government have more money and more stuff like that. So the private individuals had their own money and built it based on their own ideas and stuff, but the public schools money is to the government. So if they are more elaborative on this money and they have a lot of it, as you mentioned, your deputy prime minister made mention of the government having a lot of money. So you can use that a lot of money to build extracurricular activity centers. Thank you. Back to my own argument, there are teachers and private schools who are very, very intellectual and sound, and if they get in the public schools, they are not being paid well enough, and they don't have anything to feed on. They are just literally being oppressed. So moving to the private schools creates a better job opportunities for these teachers, and also will make the students understand, because they are being taught by people, excellent people, outstanding humans who understand these things. So if the public schools also want these, then they should create a better school environment and a better payment also. So that means everybody is satisfied. This is not a private school fault. Therefore, they should not be abolished. You often feel more comfortable sharing your opinion or venturing an answer, as I mentioned earlier. Instruction or even increase students in behavioral issues. The rates of teacher and student absenteeism are more likely to be higher at schools with a very high crowding area, because people will feel like, no, I don't want to go to that school. I didn't have a seat yesterday and I'll probably sit on the floor today as well. The teachers will also feel like, no, I entered that class and they were making noise. They were not paying attention to me anymore. So I'm not going to go back to that school. So the absenteeism rate will increase, as it is a research of the National Assessment of Educational Process. That is the NAEP. We are now in a civilized age, a civilized society, an age where human run technology and technology runs the world, where we have 95% of the private schools are now run by technology. So it will make learning more conducive, fun, and easier as you all get into the new, advanced, modernized system, and things become easier, learning becomes more effective, and your knowledge becomes vast and wide. So it is a very important thing. The private schools are run by private individuals who rely on these schools they build to have something to eat. So if these schools are being shut down, that means there will be nothing to eat, and they don't have a source of income. They will probably run poor. You've got to be considerate when it comes to humanity. It will lead. This debate is a voice to the voiceless. This debate goes to people who care. This debate is for those who value private as well as public. This debate is for many. My argument is proven and I have concluded my statement. All my points contradicting the team proposition worthy. If I continue, the drive will be too long, the seats too few, the people too many. At this very point, I prove to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for that fine speech. Now I'd like to call upon Government Whip to continue the case on government side.
Confidence, hope, and peace for who? Because it never meant anything if only the rich and privileged could access the wealth that they wanted to talk about. For every 5 bad things they say about public schools, we can also list 10 worse things about private schools. For every 10 good things they say about private schools, there are millions of young children who are forever locked out of these systems because they're told they weren't worthy enough of an education like that. The reason why they lose this debate is because it was naive to claim that life was a game of choice. The harsh reality is that there are millions of people who will forever be disadvantaged, not because they couldn't access this private education, but the existence of private schools perpetuated a game of inequality that they could never win. The solution to underfunded public schools was never to take these schools, to privatize everything and gamble with the future of millions of vulnerable people. Before I get into the issues, I want to make an extremely important rebuttal at the top of this speech. Every time they claim how public schools are unsafe, are unclean, are uneducational, are precisely the reasons why people are going to suffer under their side. Because if that was the world we are debating in, then that will be the exact reality for everyone who cannot access private education. For the reasons that both the first and the second government speaker tell you, that will probably be the majority of people, the 80% who will not have the amount of wealth needed to go in towards these schools. Which is why thousands and thousands of children under their side will be debating in those terrible, will be living in those terrible conditions. But also, the response to the POI from the second speaker is fatal to their case. If they claim that governments have massive amounts of money, and all of their problems can also be solved with this money, so it's not clear to me why we can't have public schools be good as well. Because if there are someone to claim that public schools are currently underfunded, are terrible, but they also think that the government has enough money to fix these issues, that's precisely why we get more help towards these schools under their side. So their own speaker provides the own solution to all those problems. They don't prove specifically why we need private schools to do this. But no, the very important context both speakers throughout the government side told you was this. Public schools are not inherently bad. The poor quality of government schools is something we are happy to accept right now in the worst case. But it's precisely because we decided to glorify private education, put it on a pedestal, taking away money, taking away human capital, and taking away the brightest people in the world away from these schools, meant that you never were able to create good public schools, which is why all of the inequality we talked about still stands. There are three issues I want to talk about in this speech. Number one, do private schools meet the standard of harm of abolishing? Number two, access, and number three, quality. First issue, do private schools meet the standard of harm abolishing? Maybe they are correct and there are some good private schools. Perhaps it is true that we don't abolish everything that's private and everything that may be inaccessible. But look at countries that have been able to nationalize things like healthcare, where insulin, instead of being something that's hundreds of dollars for a single capsule, is now being able to provide it at cost towards people in countries where healthcare is nationalized. And we're able to see a similar trend within where education is nationalized as well, where public education is accessible to people at extremely low fees at a fraction of the cost of private education. But we were very clear from our first speech here that even if we can't prove that all of them are bad, we explain how this causes a never-ending cycle of increasing inequality. And from our second speech, we told you how this robs away faith from public education systems, which did not receive a proper response from their side. Which means people are less likely to have these schools done, which is a massive harm. Because it means for the people who were never able to get into private schools, they never got to reap the fruits of this, which meant that it was a harm that we had to eventually abolish these private schools in order to fulfill our obligations to those people. Sure.
To begin with, many private schools are committed to providing financial aid options to make private schools education and affordable as stated, and it's already happening. Don't you think that this was a flaw to your own argument? Please address that.
First, I don't think you actually said this, but number two, even if it was made quite clear, you also additionally explain why it isn't going to be accessible for a majority of people. You can give 10 scholarships. How about the hundreds and thousands of others who will not be getting these scholarships? Number two, as we explained from the very first speech, these things are likely to be tokenistic and symbolic, providing things like wanting to increase the university's public image without actually being able to help people. And also for all the people who will be locked out on the VR side, I think if you can prove that there are still governments willing to provide these scholarships, then you can also have to believe that governments are willing to provide education on our side. So that actually ends up proving our point more than theirs. The only real claim is here that private school exists for the people who can afford. But this is a very dangerous strategy, because if their benefits only apply to this group of people, they have to explain why that group of people was the most important in the debate. Because unlike what they want you to believe, it's not as simple as that. When they are invisible victims of a capitalistic education system, when the rich and powerful flock towards private schools, that is when everyone gets harmed. The second issue then was about access. Their side says that these people will probably be run poor without these forms of private education. No, the people without food on the table will be the children who have to fork out hundreds or thousands of dollars in order to afford this education then. So if you believe they were poor people, the worst possible thing you could do for them was to spend all of those things on their education themselves when they knew that education would be able to be provided at a much lower cost towards them. But let's be very clear here, because the debate doesn't require everyone to go to an Ivy League school. You don't have to go to a Russell Group University to have a good education. Like, it's not clear why the micro impacts under their side need to be something that every kid aspires to. Because under their side, it's clear that not everyone goes to Harvard. On our side, when we increase the accessibility of public schools, that's why everyone is able to have the same playing field there, which means access is still extremely important. Because even if we talk about the millions of people where the 1% of them might get scholarships, the others are going to be left in the dust because we did not fund these public education systems for them. And access is important because you were then decided whether you are worthy of a good education based on where you were born, based on when you were born, based on who your parents were. I think this is unjust and it's just horrible for them to claim it's a good thing. The third issue then was on the quality of education. We explained why most of those harms are able to be circumvented at the point where we were able to have private schools be abolished and all those resources and human capital will go towards public schools. They claim you get things like overcrowding, but this happens because private schools build an ivory tower that's inaccessible and pushes everyone out towards public schools. They are going to be poor. We explained that when public schools become the norm, that's when companies can't fund only private schools, when governments don't give scholarships only towards private schools. That's when everyone studies under the same system. That's when you vote in governments that are going to care for their public school system instead, which is why we're better able to protect these people. Fine, let's take us out our worst case and you don't believe anything we've said. Why do we still think it's better under our side? Maybe some people under our side will no longer get the best accesses of the Western education that they may need. But they never told us why they were the most important people to care about. We explained that they weren't because they were already privileged either by merit or because they had the financial resources to do so. Richer families will be advantaged on either side. But it's only private schools that have things like professional university guidance counselors or have things like better sporting facilities that gain them a disproportionate advantage. But look, on either side, these university guidance counselors need to be employed. So when they don't go to private schools, they will go towards public schools instead. So it's not an invisible harm. The reality is that it's not just a choice for the people who can or cannot get it. The people who can get it end up being on a ladder that the people who cannot get it can never ever climb on. Which is why you give unfair advantages towards people who have massive amounts of money, who are able to game their way into the most elite universities in the world, able to get jobs that the poor will never be able to get, solely based on where you were born. This is a horrible thing to support. We are happy to abolish private schools for good. Thank you.
Thank you for that fun speech. Now let the call on opposition with here.
If you want good education, go to private schools. Before I proceed into my argument, in order for debate to progress, we think that there must be a clash. Unfortunately, opposition has been trying to debate in a bubble and not engage with any of my previous speakers' points. So please engage for today. There are three things I will be doing as a way. Firstly, I will clarify the context of the debate and provide rebuttals. Secondly, I will compelling case part by other side of the house and tell you how you can understand the debate better. I will show you the outcome of the debate and reaffirm the stand of today's argument. We'll be extremely invasive, debating in a bubble. We will tell you if that is how we will also benefit to extend the harms and benefit, as the principles are still the same in my second speaker's speech. Members of this house, before I proceed into my argument, let me start by rebutting from what we just had from the side proposition. Rebutting that we cannot any of the private schools and public schools at the same time. We can already say that, yeah, that was supported by my lead speaker, that all people have choices and we can do whatever we think is right for all of us. Members of this house, they have also said a point that why public schools are better than private schools. Yes, this is really, really good. And it is in the favor of the side proposition. Why? This is because tuition assistance and grants for people who are involved, higher academic standard that cannot be compared to public schools, is why private schools are much more better than public schools. So this point should not be regarded with this argument. They also said that it increases inequality. Members of this house, but we can clearly understand that according to debating fallacy rule, my co-debaters have committed what is called appeal to submission. That is, they have already agreed with the side proposition. This is because all their points about the lead and the prime minister, billions of people are vulnerable. That is the main point raised by the government, and which stands no chance in today's argument, because at all sides, that is what they are explaining to the whole house. So this point should not be regarded to today's argument. They have also stated a point that public schools are not entirely bad, but as says, the majority carries the vote, because life is a battle. In other words, man is always at war, either with himself yourself or with another man. You can call it a hot war or a cold war, but war is a war, and only the weak and heartless would like to see and watch their brothers being killed and taken to their own graves. So this point should be considered irrelevant into this argument. It is not going to get accessible as an answer to my POI as a race to the point, to the wave of the side of the government, but I was not fully addressed based on my point of information. Yes, members of this house, you don't have to go to good universities and others are unable to go. Yes, we can clearly understand that in favor of the side proposition, the side of the government are indeed trying to show us that other people cannot get access to public schools, to private schools, while the older people will go to private schools. I can say that that is the main point they have been continued, that they are raising into these arguments. Members of this house, why former people get access to education as a burden of proof, we can clearly understand that this cannot be regarded to this argument. The Prime Minister of the government does not really explain to the House on why he supports the abolishment of private schools, but rather gives complex theory which did not support his claim, and according to the Baton policy will have committed to school appeal to force, that is dragging and insisting for the opponent or dragging or insisting for the audience that accepts his conclusion. So this point should not be regarded, rather doesn't have any water into this argument. We are okay to leave the poor way behind. Yeah, we can clearly understand that private schools are mainly from individuals. Yeah, it has provided things that other people can get access to it. Tuition assistance have been granted. To begin with, many private schools are committed to providing financial aid options to make private schools education and affordable, accessible, alternative to public schools in the best case scenario. The Hooch case, school provides tuition assistance in the form of financial aid awards to 35% of our students' budget. Academic standards, statistics back up the fact that the private schools challenge students to meet a higher academic standard. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, private high schools list more vigorous graduation requirements than their public counterparts. And vigorousness is because the students from Hotch case, as with many other private schools, have gone to attend the top colleges and universities in the nation, and we believe in terms of motivation, they achieve the best. Members of this house, why the benefit at the end of the day is much more from the side. They have not raised a point of information to my Prime Minister as we started into this argument. This clearly shows a sign of agreement with what she has stated. Members of this house, circular arguments in terms of people who cannot afford it, committed by both the Prime Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister, which is according to the Baton policy rule, insisting and repeating one thing, that is why the vulnerable people cannot get access to private schools, which we can clearly understand that in today's argument, that is their main point that they give. Members of this house, aspects of governance and private schools have more funding. We can clearly understand that. We have clearly stated to the house on why we believe that they can provide a financial aid to other students that they can get access to this. So we can clearly understand that this point also should not be regarded in today's argument. You don't have to go to good universities and other people are unable to go, as stated by the whip of the government. We can clearly understand that, yeah, in today's argument, this according to the Baton fallacy rule, that is ad hominem. He is explaining his point based on two extremes rather than giving substantial and sequential evidences. So this point also shouldn't be regarded in today's argument. Members of this house, moving on to my own argument, we can clearly understand that private schools can also provide a high degree of safety. The public schools, in fact, private schools are nearly twice as safe as public schools, and because there is a greater teacher to student ratio, the level of supervision is much higher. A report at NEA Today 2 years ago discussed how schools in Georgia, in the midst of major funding cuts for schools, have no choice but to lift all class size limits to accommodate students with faculties. In Nigeria, we can clearly understand that public schools, in countries many, we can clearly understand that public schools are facing much more problems than private schools. That is why we clearly support that the motion of today's argument must stand. Poverty causes, we can clearly understand that the problems of public schools include the poverty, because we can reported list for that 20% of people are facing much more problem in children in the US life at below poverty level. Family factors also include problems of public schools. When comparing private schools and public schools, this is just like comparing apples and oranges. Members of this house, we can clearly understand that they have told us how to craft the idea on being poorer and not being able to accommodate private schools, but create a second flow in their own argument side by saying that it is all poorer, and that is a circular argument in today's arguments. And the nuances that they give, we are not able and doesn't stand a chance to support their claim. We give you a fairly debatable definition by we give you a terrible debatable definition. They completely dismiss the idea. We can clearly understand that in today's argument, we have clearly support that private schools should not be abolished, and we stand a chance to win today's arguments. Why? This is because we have explained to the House and how the benefit of private schools outweighs the harms by giving you things like quality education, affordable places for the public schools and for the private schools, and all other things that will support our claim. At this juncture, I put to oppose.
Thank you for that fine speech. Now let the call upon opposition reply to conclude the case on the opposition side. Here.
Man's mind, once stretched by a new idea, never regains its original dimensions. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the last time for today's opposition. It is my pleasure to summarize this debate and see what the outcome it actually is. The Prime Minister from the side proposition did not play his role as a Prime Minister. Rather, he came out here and told us how taxes are being paid on the private school, but it is not so because private schools do not even pay taxes. While the Prime Minister from the side opposition came out here and gave us a remarkable, marvelous, and outstanding debate where she laid her points, shared her roles, and played her place quite wonderfully. The Deputy Prime Minister from the side proposition came out here and repeated the argument did by the Prime Minister from the proposition side, which led them to commit an offense in the debating laws of circular arguments without giving strong reasons to actually support their claims, which made it quite not going to stand on the tables of today's argument. While the Deputy Prime Minister from the side opposition played her role quite wonderfully, came out here audibly and told us a lot about why private schools shouldn't be abolished. Everyone should have the right to perform as long as you're in the city. So that means private schools can also be built and can run in the cities as well as public schools, and you can go there too. Therefore, the Deputy Prime Minister from the side opposition played her role quite wonderfully. First, the supporting speaker from the proposition side came out here and told us about debates. He actually elongated his first point and did not add anything to it. So therefore, also his point does not stand. While the supporting speaker from the opposition side came out here wonderfully and in such an amazing, unique, and beautiful manner told us a lot about why private schools should stand. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to summarize this debate and also showed you how the opposition side, a group of individuals, quite amazing and a lot of experience from the side opposition. Khadija, Amina, and Abubakar, a debate beautifully presented. Education is the passport to the future, for tomorrow belongs to those who prepare for it. At this very point, I prove so. Thank you.
Thank you for that fine speech. Now let the call upon government reply to conclude the case on government reply.
fallacy that opposition chooses to believe in is that everyone wants a good education, but never engaging with the premise that not everyone is able to access this thing in the first place. We never deny that life is a game of choice, but recognize that the case coming from opposition is contingent on the ability for them to prove to us that everyone can access this choice in the first place. Therefore, their case can only benefit rich people or individuals who can actually access this choice in the first place. They needed to prove to us today why access was either number one, not going to be a problem, but number two, even in the instances that it is a problem, why are they okay with leaving people behind? Understand, so in this speech, two things. I have two issues. Firstly, on what is the best interest for people on the ground, and secondly, the best interest of the state as a whole, right? But recognize, before I explain these issues, understand that opposition refused to engage with all of the material coming from me and Umar. So in this, my first issue, on how it benefits the best interest of people on the ground, right? Understand, Umar talked to you about two things. Firstly, access and quality. He proved to you on why outside the house, there will be a better incentive for the state to fund local schools in the first place, because now it is everyone's responsibility to care about it, because everyone goes to these schools in the first place, right? Understand, he told you that there will be a better access to the same level of education. The disparity that exists under that side of the house still exists because of the difference in these levels, right? Therefore, we still get better access, but even more, we level the playing field on the outside of the house, because everyone gets the same amount of resources, everyone has to go to the same type of schools. They never address this. Secondly, Umar talked to you about the quality, right? On how we reduce the elitist culture within society, because now there's a less likelihood for people to scapegoat the public school, the public education system that is done by public officials. Because now because he explained to you, we force everyone to go to the same system, right? Therefore, we are more likely to vote in governments who would care about the system in the first place. And now, at the point in which when states they take over these public schools, in the point in which you force the children or rich people to go to these schools in the first place, is the point in which they're actually going to care about these schools more, because the children are actually the ones who are living and learning within this system. No levels, no engagement coming from side opposition. My second issue on how it better increases. Why is this policy the best interest of the state, right? Umar told you one thing, which is under the scope of national development. He told you that because everything is now national and the state controls every school, right? There is a better ability for the state to have better statistical analysis, and they'll be able to understand the education demographic of the state even more. Therefore, they're able to cater to the needs of the education system even more, whereby they're able to fund more things such as STEM programs and etc. Right? But secondly, I argued to you in my speech with no engagement from opposition on why there'll be more trust in the education system in the first place, or not there a higher likelihood for poor people to send their schools to send their children to these schools, whereby they will believe that schools are the places that their children can have a better life. Therefore, they should send their children to these schools. And lastly, I also proved to you as to why there will be a more incentive for people to want to remain in this system, which would benefit the state in the long run, because now they have more capital for future development. Do not let opposition continue to let the poor child sit on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you for that passage. And with that speech, it concludes for the debate for today. Thank you, everyone.